She stood there calm but tired and said something you'll never hear from a court transcript. She said she was taken somewhere powerful men went and that the paperwork exists to show who opened the door. That line alone changes everything, a survivor asking us to look not at a single predator but at the paperwork that protected him. It's the files that make the story public, it's the files that might tell us who else was involved. She wasn't some random traveler. She was a young woman with a dream, told to trust a person who promised introductions and a shot at a career. The pitch was simple, a massage, a promise, a name drop. That promise "I can help you" was the bait, and it worked like a blueprint.
Hello, my name is Shantae Davies, and I'm here before you today as a survivor of decades of pain, trauma, and betrayal at the hands of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, and the people who enabled them, and a government that for far too long refused to help. In 2002, I was living in California, a young woman with high aspirations of becoming an actress. I was already beginning to make a name for myself in the industry. A person I trusted, someone I thought was a friend, invited me to meet a powerful woman who could help advance my career. That woman happened to be Ghislaine Maxwell. I was asked to give her a massage, though I had almost no experience, and when I did, she praised me and promised introductions to someone enormously powerful, someone who could change the course of my life, and that man was Jeffrey Epstein. At first, I was an excited young woman on top of the world. Epstein flew me to his private island. He listened to my dreams, promised to help, but his promises came with a catch. The abuse began. He told me to keep it secret. He manipulated me with quid pro quo I did not consent to, but I felt I had no one to turn to. He was too powerful. I was just one of the many young women trapped in his orbit. I was even taken on a trip to Africa with former President Bill Clinton and other notable figures. In those moments, I realized how powerless I was. If I spoke out, who would believe me? Who would protect me? Epstein himself was the most powerful leader of our country. Epstein surrounded himself, with the most powerful leaders of our country and the world. He abused not only me, but countless others, and everyone seemed to look away. The truth is, Epstein had a free pass. He bragged about his powerful friends, including our current president, Donald Trump. It was his biggest brag, actually. And what I endured will haunt me forever. I live every day with PTSD. I live as a mother trying to raise my child while distrusting a world that has betrayed me. This kind of trauma never leaves you. It breaks families apart. It shapes the way we see everyone around us. But one thing is certain, unless we learn from this history, monsters like Epstein will rise again. There are files, government files, that hold the truth about Epstein, who he knew, who owed him, who protected him, and why he was allowed to operate for so long without consequence. Why was Maxwell the only one held accountable when so many others played a role? Why does the government hide this information from the public? This secrecy is not protection, it's complicity. And as long as the truth is buried, justice will remain out of reach. That is why this bill matters. Passing it will, bless you, ensure that the suffering of survivors is not in vain. Passing it will bring accountability, transparency, and prevention. It will help protect the next generation of predators who seek to place themselves above the law through wealth, influence, and connections. This is not just my story. It is about every survivor who carries invisible scars. It's about the weight we live with daily. It is about the families broken and the futures stolen. So I ask you, President Trump and members of Congress, why do we continue to cover up sexual abuse and assault? Who are we covering for? Let the public know the truth. We cannot heal without justice. We cannot protect the future if we refuse to confront the past. Thank you.
Hundreds of pages of testimony from survivors repeat that same moment: ambition offered as a ladder, access offered as a ticket, and what followed was never the deal they expected. But that wasn't the whole story. Soon after, the travel began. Private planes, secluded properties, a private island where the rules felt different and the guards were invisible. She says she flew on his plane. She says she was taken to Epstein's island and to far-off trips she never would have imagined. Those trips were about more than luxury. They were the rehearsal of a system where introductions became control. Survivors across events have described similar travel patterns, and those travel logs are exactly the kind of records people are now demanding from the government. And what happened next would shock everyone who still believes money always answers for wrongdoing. Because what we have instead of full answers is a messy patchwork plea deals that never told the whole story, documents sealed or redacted, and a public release that leaves more questions than it answers. Advocates and lawmakers are calling out the government for releasing small batches and holding back the rest. They say those withheld pages could show the network, not just one man, and reveal who enabled him. The FBI and DOJ have pushed back, citing legal limits and past deals, while survivors and lawmakers push for more transparency. That fight over what stays sealed and what goes public is now playing out on Capitol Hill in hearings and letters, and it matters because secrecy looks an awful lot like protection. So what's actually in those files? Think flight manifests that show who rode where, bank records that follow the money, witness interview notes that may name facilitators and enablers, internal memos that show prosecutorial choices, and visitor logs from private properties. Put together, those pages could corroborate survivor memory, show patterns of grooming, and expose institutions that turned a blind eye. That's why survivors aren't just asking for revenge, they want the ledger. They want to know how the system operationalized access for predators, how shell companies hid transactions, and whether investigations were ever allowed to follow the paper trail where it led. And the case for releasing responsibly redacted documents is exactly what bipartisan bills and public pressure are trying to make. But that ledger can't fix everything. The system itself had cracks, witnesses silenced by time, memories blurred by trauma, evidence lost or changed by delays, and legal deals that kept victims in the dark. When cases take years to emerge, the memory fades, witnesses relocate, and prosecutors face a harder path to a jury's certainty. Survivors describe living with PTSD and broken families, watching chance after chance to hold people accountable dissipate into prosecutorial discretion and sealed negotiations. That long delay didn't just hurt court cases, it hurt lives, which is why many survivors argue the justice system needs reform, not surrender. There are concrete changes that would make a difference. First, make transparency the default. Investigative files in systemic abuse cases should undergo independent review and responsible public release with survivor protections that would let external experts and civil litigants examine the facts. Second, ban secret non-prosecution arrangements that keep victims unaware. At minimum, require judicial review and victim notice when such deals are considered. Third, empower independent special prosecutors or bipartisan commissions to examine networks of trafficking where power or institutions may be implicated. Fourth, ramp up financial oversight and whistleblower protections so suspicious banking activity can't be buried in bureaucracy. These aren't pipe dreams, they're the kinds of reforms advocates and some lawmakers are already pushing, and they map directly to the pain survivors describe. And what about the powerful names people whisper about? Survivors have said they were introduced to influential figures, some recall trips with well-known politicians and celebrities. Reporting and committee activity in recent months has added to those demands for transparency. Hearings and letters to the FBI director, public survivor press conferences and bills in Congress all push the same question: who else knew, and why were those connections shielded? It's worth repeating carefully, allegations and claims need scrutiny, and speculation should be framed as such. That's why releasing the underlying documents responsibly redacted is so important, so claims can be tested and investigated by independent parties, rather than remain in rumor or politics. Now imagine the documents in a stack: flight logs, bank wires, FD 302S, visitor lists, prosecutorial memos. Imagine them read not by partisans but by neutral investigators who could decide whether civil suits are warranted or whether new criminal inquiries should begin. That is the argument survivors and several lawmakers have been making publicly, and it's the reason hearings and public pressure escalated into the fall months. People in power may deny wrongdoing, agencies may cite legal constraints, that's expected. What's not acceptable is permanent secrecy that denies survivors any real shot at answers. If you want to be part of the fix, there are practical steps. Call your member of Congress and tell them to back bills that require disclosure with survivor protections. Support organizations that provide legal and psychological help to survivors. Share testimony and demand that the Department of Justice stop treating these files as political bargaining chips. Pressure for independent oversight and for laws that stop secret deals. This isn't about politics for survivors, it's about whether future victims will be protected or left to fight in the dark. Finally, remember the person behind the testimony. She said she lives with the weight of what happened every day. She is a mother who described PTSD, betrayal, and the fear that the system chose reputation over truth. When a survivor says, "I was taken on a trip," or "I trusted someone who promised me a career," those sentences are not just sound bites. They are the threads investigators say can be tied back to a larger pattern if the files are opened. And that's the last simple point. If we want to honor courage, we don't argue in public about who has better headlines. We look at the records and let the evidence be seen. So ask yourself, if those files could bring clarity to a lifetime of unanswered questions, why would anyone fight so hard to keep them closed? If transparency could prevent the next pattern of grooming, wouldn't that be worth the discomfort of facing uncomfortable names? The answer you choose matters, because while the headlines fade, the survivors don't. If you care, do one thing: share this testimony, call your rep, and insist that secrecy not be the last refuge for people with power. Because if we don't demand the files, we risk letting the same machinery of influence build again behind closed doors. Thank you for listening to her words. If this moved you even a little, leave a comment below with the one question you want answered from those files, and if you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe. The fight for truth is only beginning, and it needs more witnesses in the light.